For 30 years, country music fans have watched Reba McEntire and Vince Gill share stages, trade harmonies, and look at each other with a warmth that seemed to say more than words ever could. The rumors never faded. If anything, they grew, whispered in green rooms, printed in tabloids, and carried in the pauses between songs. Reba stayed silent. She never confirmed, never denied, not even when the questions came again and again. Until now. Because after decades of speculation, she has finally revealed the truth about Vince Gill and why the bond the world thought it understood was something far more complicated. What she just admitted changes everything fans believed about their story. In the early 1990s, country music was at a high point. The genre was breaking into mainstream charts, crossing over into pop culture in a way it hadn't in years. Reba McEntire was already a household name. She had built a career on powerhouse vocals, emotional storytelling, and a stage presence that could fill an arena without a single pyrotechnic. Vince Gill, meanwhile, was the golden-voiced Oklahoma native, whose guitar work and easy charm made him both a musician's musician and a fan favorite. Their worlds collided in the way so many musical partnerships do on stage, in front of a crowd, where sparks are either impossible to fake or impossible to miss. One of their earliest public collaborations came during an award show performance that seemed effortless. Their harmonies blended in a way that was more than just technically perfect. There was a comfort between them, a shared timing, the kind of connection that usually takes years to develop. Fans noticed, industry insiders noticed, and almost overnight, whispers began that there might be more to their chemistry than just music. It didn't help that Reba and Vince's personal lives were both in transitional periods. Reba had weathered professional challenges and personal heartbreak, and Vince had experienced his own marital ups and downs. In Nashville, a city where the music community is both tight-knit and endlessly watchful, that combination, two stars with overlapping struggles, was enough to light the match for speculation. What audiences saw only reinforced the talk. At charity concerts, they often found themselves paired for duets. At CMA and ACM award shows, they would exchange quick smiles before a punchline, glance at each other during emotional moments, or offer a hand squeeze as they passed on stage. These were small gestures, but to fans already looking for signs, they became evidence. Then there was the music itself. Songs like "The Heart Won't Lie," which they recorded together, blurred the lines between performance and personal confession. The lyrics spoke of longing, of unspoken promises, and when Reba and Vince sang them, it felt like they were letting the audience in on something intimate. Whether it was intentional or just the natural byproduct of two skilled interpreters delivering a song, the effect was the same people left convinced they had seen a piece of real emotion. In interviews, both were diplomatic. Reba, ever the professional, would steer the conversation back to the music or the industry. Vince, known for his easy humor, would offer a joke and a quick subject change. Neither confirmed anything, but neither distanced themselves from the narrative either. For the press, it was an open invitation to keep the story alive. For fans, it was just enough to believe there was truth behind the rumors. This period marked the start of what would become a 3-decade thread in both of their careers. Whether they were co-hosting events, performing side by side, or simply photographed laughing backstage, the visual record built a case that even the most skeptical observers found hard to dismiss. Every year that passed without a clear answer only added to the intrigue. Yet, behind the smiles and the perfectly pitched harmonies, there were realities the public didn't see. Personal commitments, professional boundaries, and the pressure of living under a microscope. In a way, their connection became a kind of stagecraft in itself. A dance they both understood had to be carefully managed. The rumors, however, didn't fade. They became part of the backdrop to any conversation about Reba McEntire and Vince Gill. And while the early spark may have been just a moment in time, it was a moment powerful enough to shape how the world would view them for decades. Even so, that was only the beginning. What followed would take the rumors to an entirely different level, fueled not just by glances and duets, but by life events that seemed to line up a little too perfectly. By the mid-1990s, the connection between Reba McEntire and Vince Gill had gone from a quiet undercurrent to one of the most talked-about topics in country music. The spark that fans had noticed in those early performances wasn't just still there, it seemed stronger. Every time they appeared together, the audience leaned in a little closer, as if waiting for one of them to slip and confirm what so many already believed. Award season only added fuel. At the CMA Awards, there was the year they shared the stage for a tribute performance that left the crowd on its feet. The harmonies were flawless, but it was the way they looked at each other that people couldn't stop replaying. Backstage photos showed them laughing between takes, leaning in just a little too close, and walking side by side, as if they were the only two in the room. The tabloids pounced. Headlines framed their friendship as a secret romance, citing close sources who claimed the chemistry went far beyond music. In Nashville coffee shops and recording studios, the story spread faster than a chart-topping single. Musicians whispered about it on tour buses. Radio DJs hinted at it between songs. The idea of Reba and Vince as a couple had taken on a life of its own, one neither of them seemed eager to shut down. Part of what kept the rumors alive was timing. Vince's marriage had ended, and Reba was entering a period of personal reinvention after navigating her own heartbreak. Their schedules seemed to align perfectly for collaborations, and they often ended up on the same benefit bills, television specials, and award show lineups. Even charity events became high-voltage moments. A fundraiser in Nashville, where they performed a stripped-down duet, left fans swearing they'd witnessed something real. The emotion in their delivery was undeniable. Then came The Heart Won't Lie. The music video alone was enough to send speculation into overdrive. In it, they played characters separated by duty but bound by unspoken feelings. A storyline that mirrored exactly what the gossip pages were printing. Every glance, every touch of the hand in the video became proof. Fans froze frames, passed around VHS copies, and circled moments where their eyes seemed to say more than the lyrics. Yet, both stars remained careful. When pressed in interviews, Reba would smile and say she was grateful for Vince as a collaborator. Vince, with his easy wit, would redirect to a story about the studio or about guitar tuning. They didn't deny the rumors outright, but they didn't feed them either. This middle ground kept the public guessing and kept the story alive. The country music industry, always protective of its image, had seen plenty of rumor storms before, but this one had staying power. It wasn't scandal in the traditional sense, no public fights, no tabloid exposés with damaging evidence. It was subtler, wrapped in hope and what-ifs, and that made it even more magnetic. Over the years, these moments layered into something larger. Fans began to associate their names in the same way they did legendary country duos, even though Reba and Vince had never officially been one. It became part of their shared mythology, a story that sat just outside the spotlight, waiting for either of them to finally tell it. And yet, for all the winks and subtle glances, there were realities that neither wanted exposed. Behind the music, behind the award show smiles, there were personal lives and commitments that couldn't simply be brushed aside for the sake of a rumor. What happened next would bring the speculation to its highest point yet, and nearly force Reba to break the silence years before she was ready. Behind the music, the smiles, and the seamless stage chemistry, Reba McEntire and Vince Gill were navigating lives far more complicated than the public ever saw. The truth was that both were carrying personal responsibilities that left little room for anything beyond friendship and music. Yet those responsibilities only made the rumors more tempting for fans to believe. For Reba, the 1990s had been a decade of transformation. She was not only managing a thriving career, but also rebuilding her life after loss and unexpected change. In 1991, she faced one of her darkest moments when a plane crash took the lives of several members of her band and tour staff. The tragedy left her emotionally shattered, yet determined to keep moving forward. At the same time, she was balancing her marriage to her then-husband Narvel Blackstock, who was also her manager. Every decision she made was a negotiation between her personal life, her professional ambitions, and the image she had carefully built. Vince Gill's world was equally complex. He was married to country singer Janice Oliver during much of this period, and together they were raising a daughter. Vince's career was demanding, pulling him from one city to another, while also requiring him to maintain the kind of clean, approachable public persona that made him a favorite in Nashville. That meant avoiding controversy at all costs, and a rumor linking him romantically to one of the biggest female stars in the genre was exactly the kind of attention he didn't need. Still, the music industry has a way of blurring personal boundaries. Award show rehearsals meant hours together off-camera. Tours and charity concerts created shared experiences that deepened their bond. They could be seen laughing over inside jokes, exchanging a knowing glance during soundcheck, or checking in on each other before a big performance. None of it crossed a line, but to those on the outside, it looked like evidence of something more. The pressure came not just from fans, but from within the industry itself. Publicists quietly discussed how to address the constant questions. Managers weighed whether the speculation was helping or hurting their marketability. In a business where image is as carefully constructed as any song, every public moment was assessed for risk. Reba and Vince both knew the stakes, and both understood that speaking too plainly could unravel years of work. There were moments, however, when even their closest friends wondered if there was a deeper connection. Their duet performances often carried an emotional intensity that didn't seem rehearsed. Vince's tender harmonies behind Reba's lead vocals felt personal, almost protective. Reba, in turn, seemed to sing to him, not just with him, in a way that made even seasoned session players take notice. Yet both of them were grounded in a sense of loyalty. Reba was committed to her marriage during those years, and Vince to his. They knew that crossing a line would not only jeopardize their personal lives, but also their reputations in a tight-knit Nashville community where news traveled fast. The truth, in the end, was far less scandalous than the rumors, but it was also more human. Two artists, both navigating personal challenges, found in each other a source of comfort and understanding that didn't need to be romantic to be real. Even so, the years would bring changes neither could predict. Marriages would end, life circumstances would shift, and with those shifts, the rumor mill would spin again, harder than ever, testing whether their silence could hold. What came next pushed the whispers into headlines and brought Reba closer than ever to revealing the reality of her relationship with Vince Gill long before she was finally ready to say the words out loud. By the late 1990s, the whispers about Reba McEntire and Vince Gill had outgrown Nashville. They were no longer just quiet conversations between industry insiders. They were showing up in newspaper columns, morning talk shows, and fan club newsletters across the country. But there was one night, one performance, that pushed the speculation into overdrive and made it impossible to ignore. It happened at the CMA Awards, a night already charged with emotion and history. Reba and Vince were paired for a live duet, a stripped-down arrangement of The Heart Won't Lie that placed them in the center of the stage with nothing but a spotlight and the audience's undivided attention. The song, already drenched in longing and unspoken promises, became something else entirely in that moment. The way they locked eyes, the way Vince leaned into Reba's voice, the way she softened on the final line, it looked and felt less like a performance and more like a confession. The reaction was immediate. Viewers at home began calling radio stations, saying they had just witnessed proof. Entertainment magazines ran still photos from the performance with captions designed to stoke curiosity. Fan forums lit up with frame-by-frame breakdowns, circling glances and gestures as if they were decoding a mystery. Even the industry press, usually more reserved, began hinting that there might be a deeper story between these two stars. The timing made it all the more combustible. Vince was newly single, and Reba had just stepped into a new phase of her career, experimenting with television and film roles alongside her music. They were both in transitional seasons, both on top of their game, and both seemingly more comfortable together than ever before. For those already invested in the rumor, it felt like the moment they'd been waiting for. Backstage, the performance became the talk of the night. Other artists congratulated them on the emotional delivery, but the tone often carried a knowing edge, as if the compliments were about more than the music. Photographers captured them walking off stage together, still smiling, still talking, as if the world outside the curtain didn't exist. For weeks afterward, the story wouldn't die down. Reba and Vince couldn't share a stage without the performance being referenced. Interviewers brought it up in subtle and sometimes not so subtle ways. Even years later, fans would point to that night as the real moment, the instant when the rumor stopped being just speculation and became part of their shared legacy. What no one knew was that the truth, though far less sensational, was still powerful, and Reba would carry it with her for decades, before deciding the world was finally ready to hear it. After the CMA Awards performance that had everyone talking, Reba McEntire found herself at a crossroads. She knew the speculation about Vince Gill was louder than ever, and she also knew how easily it could drown out everything else she had worked for. In country music, image isn't just important, it's survival. And once a story like this takes root, it can grow into something you can't control. For Reba, silence became a shield. In those years, both she and Vince had personal commitments that mattered more than any headline. She was still married to Narvel Blackstock, the man who also managed her career. Vince was raising a young daughter and navigating the end of his own marriage. To fan the flames, even unintentionally, would mean inviting a level of scrutiny neither of them wanted. Her choice to say nothing wasn't avoidance. It was protection for herself, for Vince, and for the people they cared about. But there was another reason. Reba understood that the mystery itself had a kind of power. By never confirming or denying the rumors, she kept control of the narrative. The speculation kept their names linked in the public's imagination without crossing the line into scandal. Every time a reporter brought it up, she could smile, deflect, and steer the conversation back to the music. Vince had his own way of sidestepping a quick joke, a story about rehearsals, and between them, they kept the truth to themselves. Still, years of sidestepping take their toll. Even close friends would sometimes ask in private if the rumors were true, their curiosity sharpened by decades of near moments caught on stage or backstage. And while Reba could laugh it off, she also knew that eventually she'd have to answer, not because she owed it to the public, but because she wanted the truth to come from her, not from gossip. That moment came much later, when the weight of 30 years made the timing feel right. Reba finally spoke, and in doing so, she unraveled a story the world thought it already knew. Yes, she and Vince had shared a bond. Yes, it was real, and it was built over years of music, shared experiences, and mutual understanding. But it had never been romantic. What fans were seeing in those duets, in those sidelong glances, was something deeper than romance, and in many ways, harder to find a creative partnership, grounded in trust, respect, and genuine friendship. Vince echoed her words, calling her one of his dearest friends and most trusted collaborators. He admitted their closeness had probably fed the rumors, but he wouldn't change it. That connection, he said, had been one of the constants in his life. For some fans, the truth was a surprise. For others, it only made their bond more remarkable proof that not every powerful relationship needs to fit a romantic script. And for Reba, telling the truth after all those years wasn't about ending the story. It was about owning it. Her words closed a chapter the public had been writing for her since the 1990s. And in doing so, she reminded everyone that sometimes the most enduring love story is the one that stays exactly as it is. For 30 years, the story of Reba McEntire and Vince Gill lived in the spaces between songs, in the glances caught by cameras, in the way their voices blended, and in the quiet loyalty they showed each other when the lights went down. When Reba finally chose to speak, she reminded everyone that not every powerful bond needs to fit a romantic script. Sometimes, the most enduring love story is the one that stays exactly as it is. For more emotional stories, check out this video.